You're just not my type romantically, she explained after leading me on for 2 years, so I became someone else's perfect type, got a better job in a new state, and never looked back. Now she's asking mutual friends about me while I introduce my girlfriend to my family. Hey folks, before we jump into the video, please consider subscribing and giving a thumbs up if you like seeing karma work faster than expected. Thank you. Let's dive in. 2 years of my life condensed into one brutal conversation at Muddy Waters, the coffee shop where Quinn and I had spent countless Saturday mornings talking about everything and nothing. I'm Ian, 26, been fighting fires in Richmond for 4 years now, and I'd convinced myself that what Quinn and I had was heading somewhere real, the late-night phone calls when she couldn't sleep, weekend hiking trips to Shenandoah, helping her move twice, being her emergency contact at work, cooking dinner together every Tuesday because that was our night. She'd called me her best guy friend, so many times I'd started hearing it as best guy friend, with an invisible comma that made all the difference in my head. That Tuesday morning, she texted asking to meet for coffee with that serious tone that makes your stomach drop, and I'd actually brought the small velvet box in my jacket pocket because some delusional part of me thought maybe, finally, she was ready to make this official. Instead, Quinn sat across from me in her green sweater, the one I'd bought her for Christmas, and delivered the words that would replay in my head for months. Ian, I need to be honest with you about something. You're just not my type romantically. The way she said it, like she was explaining a simple fact about the weather, made it clear this had been decided long ago. I care about you so much as a friend, but I need someone more intellectual, more artistic. You know, like a musician or a writer, someone who can discuss philosophy and literature. I watched her gesture with her hands as she spoke, the same hands I'd held during scary movies, the same person who'd sobbed on my shoulder when her dad had his heart attack last spring. You're such a good guy, but you're more blue-collar, you know? I need someone who challenges me intellectually, who can take me to gallery openings and poetry readings. She looked genuinely surprised when I asked, "What did you think we were doing all this time?" Her confusion seemed authentic as she explained, "We're friends, Ian. Really close friends. I thought you understood that. I never led you on." But she had led me on, in 1,000 small ways, borrowing my hoodies and never giving them back, asking me to be her +1 to her coworker's wedding, letting me pay for everything while calling it, hanging out, falling asleep on my couch during movie nights and waking up in my arms without pulling away. "You act surprised that I caught feelings," I said quietly, "but you've been treating me like a boyfriend without the title for 2 years. She shifted uncomfortably, finally showing a crack in her certainty. I didn't realize you saw it that way. I thought we were just really good friends who enjoyed spending time together." The cafe felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in around this conversation that was dismantling everything I'd built my hopes on. "Good friends don't usually call each other at midnight just to hear someone's voice," I pointed out, but she had an answer for that too. "You're just easy to talk to. You listen without judgment." Easy to talk to? Like I was some kind of emotional support animal instead of a man who'd fallen completely in love with her. I reached for my wallet, pulling out enough cash to cover both our drinks and her blueberry muffin, same order she'd been getting for 2 years. "Ian, please don't be mad," she said as I stood up. "I really value our friendship. You're one of the most important people in my life." The irony was sharp enough to cut, important enough to depend on, not important enough to date. "I hope you find your musician or writer," I said, meaning it more than she'd ever know. As I walked toward the door, I heard her call after me, "We can still be friends, right?" But I didn't turn around because the answer was already clear in the weight of that velvet box still sitting in my pocket, and in the realization that I'd spent 2 years auditioning for a role she'd never intended to cast me in. The first week after our coffee shop conversation, I did what any rational person would do. I went to work, came home, ordered pizza, and pretended my phone wasn't buzzing with Quinn's texts about some crisis with her apartment's hot water heater. But by the second week, something shifted, and instead of wallowing in self-pity, I started researching fire department positions in other states with the same methodical approach I used for equipment inspections. That's when I found the opening in Minneapolis, fire safety inspector position with the potential for advancement to regional coordinator, starting salary $15,000 more than I was making in Richmond, plus they'd pay for continuing education. I'd always been good at the technical side of firefighting, understanding building codes and safety systems, but I'd never pushed myself beyond the basic requirements because I'd been too focused on building a life with Quinn in Virginia. Now I had nothing keeping me here, so I started taking evening classes in emergency management at VCU, hitting the gym with the kind of dedication I'd previously reserved for planning Quinn's birthday surprises, and reading everything I could get my hands on about fire prevention and public safety policy. The physical transformation came easier than expected. When you're not spending every free evening cooking dinner for someone who sees you as just a friend, you have a lot more time for meal prep and morning runs. 3 weeks into my self-improvement campaign, my phone started blowing up with calls from Quinn, but not the kind I might have hoped for a month earlier. Her apartment building had failed a fire safety inspection, and she was facing potential eviction if the violations weren't corrected within 30 days. The old Ian would have dropped everything to help her navigate the bureaucracy, would have used his connections in the Richmond Fire Department to get her building prioritized for a reinspection, would have spent his weekend helping her research tenant rights and maybe even lending her money for a hotel if she needed temporary housing. Instead, I watched her increasingly frantic voicemails pile up while I studied for my emergency management midterm. "Ian, please call me back. This is serious," she'd said in the first message, still using that tone that assumed I'd be available whenever she needed me. By the 5th message, her voice had shifted to genuine panic. "I don't know what to do, and you're the only person I know who understands this stuff. Please, I really need your help." But I didn't call back because helping Quinn with her crisis would mean sliding back into that comfortable role of being her emergency contact, her problem solver, her best guy friend, who handled all the practical stuff while she waited for some artistic type to sweep her off her feet. I gave my captain at Station 19 my 2 weeks' notice, telling him about the Minneapolis opportunity and watching him try to talk me out of leaving such a solid position. "You've got a real future here, Martinez," Captain Williams said, using my last name the way he did when he was being serious. "Richmond's going to miss having someone who actually reads the safety manuals." But Richmond wasn't going to miss me. Richmond had Quinn in it, and Quinn had made it crystal clear that I wasn't what she wanted, so staying would just mean torturing myself with proximity to someone who'd never see me as anything more than a reliable backup plan. I started boxing up my apartment without telling any of our mutual friends about the move, partly because I didn't want word getting back to Quinn, and partly because I was curious to see how long it would take anyone to notice I was gone. The answer, as it turned out, would be longer than I expected, and by then I'd already become someone completely different. Minneapolis in October was everything Richmond wasn't: crisp air that didn't carry memories, tree-lined streets I'd never walked with someone who didn't want me, coffee shops where no one knew my order by heart. My new position as fire safety inspector came with an office downtown and the kind of responsibility I'd never had in Richmond, reviewing building plans for high-rises and coordinating with city planning on new construction projects. Within my first month, I was enrolled in night classes at the University of Minnesota working toward my bachelor's in emergency management, something I'd talked about doing for years but never prioritized when my evenings were reserved for Quinn's schedule. The physical transformation that had started in Richmond accelerated in Minnesota: regular gym sessions, meal planning, a complete wardrobe overhaul that replaced my collection of firefighter t-shirts with button-downs and well-fitted jeans that actually looked intentional. But the real change was mental, the way I started seeing myself as someone with ambitions beyond waiting for Quinn to notice my potential. I joined a photography club at the university, started attending gallery openings in the warehouse district, signed up for wine tastings at local vineyards, all the intellectual and artistic activities Quinn had claimed I wasn't capable of enjoying. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was actually loving these experiences, not because they proved anything to Quinn, but because I'd never given myself permission to explore interests beyond firefighting and whatever Quinn wanted to do on weekends. My social media presence, which had previously consisted of the occasional fire truck photo and pictures of Quinn that I'd since deleted, transformed into a curated collection of Minneapolis adventures. Photos from the Walker Art Center, weekend trips to Duluth for lighthouse photography, wine and cheese nights with my emergency management study group, hiking shots from the North Shore that showed off the physique I'd been building. Every post was carefully chosen to project the image of someone living his best life, someone who'd moved on completely and was thriving in ways that had nothing to do with his past. 3 months into my Minneapolis life, I was checking Instagram when I noticed Quinn had viewed every single one of my recent stories, sometimes within minutes of me posting them. She'd started liking posts from 6 months ago, scrolling deep into my feed like she was looking for clues about when exactly I'd become this version of myself. That same week, I got texts from our mutual friends back in Richmond asking where I'd disappeared to. Apparently Quinn had been asking around about me with increasing frequency. "Dude, Quinn's been asking everyone if they've heard from you," my buddy Marcus texted. "She seems kind of worried. Said you're not responding to her messages." But I hadn't received any recent messages from Quinn, which meant she'd probably tried calling my old number or using social media platforms where I'd blocked her after the move. The idea that she was trying to reach me gave me a satisfaction I hadn't expected, not because I wanted her to suffer, but because it meant she was finally feeling my absence from her support system. My new life had a rhythm that didn't include being anyone's emergency contact or backup plan, morning workouts before heading to the office, evening classes 3 nights a week, weekend photography expeditions around the Twin Cities, and a growing circle of friends who knew me as Ian the fire safety inspector who was working on his degree, not Ian the guy who'd spent 2 years pining after someone who didn't want him. The version of myself I was becoming felt more authentic than anything I'd been in Richmond, like I'd finally stopped performing the role of someone worthy of Quinn's attention and started actually becoming someone worthy of my own respect. When holiday photos started appearing on social media from our old Richmond friend group, I noticed Quinn looked smaller somehow, less vibrant than the confident woman who delivered my romantic death sentence at Muddy Waters 6 months earlier. She was still beautiful, still surrounded by the same friends at the same bars, but something in her eyes looked like she was searching for something that wasn't there anymore, and I realized with crystal clarity that what she was looking for was the comfort of knowing I'd always be available when she needed me, a safety net she'd taken for granted until it disappeared. The community safety workshop at the Minneapolis Convention Center was supposed to be routine, presenting fire prevention strategies to property managers and social workers who dealt with at-risk housing. I was setting up my laptop when she walked in, camera bag slung over her shoulder, press badge hanging around her neck, and the kind of effortless confidence that made everyone in the room look twice. Avery Chin, freelance photographer covering the workshop for the city's community newsletter, approached my booth during the break with genuine curiosity about my work instead of the polite disinterest I usually got from people who saw fire safety as bureaucratic box checking. "Your presentation on smoke detector placement was fascinating," she said, and I could tell she actually meant it. "I never realized how much science goes into something that seems so simple. Mind if I get some shots of your demonstration setup?" Most people saw fire safety inspection as the boring side of emergency services, but Avery asked intelligent questions about thermal dynamics and building airflow patterns, treating my expertise like it was genuinely impressive instead of just a job requirement. When I mentioned I was working on my emergency management degree, her face lit up with the kind of respect I'd been craving for years. "That's incredible. You're literally saving lives through prevention. That's so much more impactful than just responding to emergencies after they happen." During our coffee conversation after the workshop, she told me about her photography work documenting urban development and community services, how she'd gotten into freelance work after leaving her corporate marketing job to pursue something more meaningful. "I love capturing people who are passionate about their work," she said, showing me photos on her camera of a neighborhood garden project and a literacy program for seniors. "There's something really attractive about someone who's dedicated to making their community safer." The word attractive hung in the air between us, and for the first time in months, I felt like someone was seeing me as a desirable man instead of a reliable friend. When she asked if I'd be interested in grabbing dinner sometime, not for a story but just because she'd enjoyed our conversation, I said yes without the hesitation that had become second nature after 2 years of reading between Quinn's lines. Our first real date was at a photography exhibition downtown, her suggestion, and I found myself genuinely engaged with the artwork instead of pretending to be interested to impress someone. "You have a good eye for composition," Avery said as we looked at a series of architectural photos. "Have you ever thought about combining your fire safety work with photography? Documenting building safety features could be really powerful." She saw connections I'd never considered, ways my professional knowledge could intersect with creative pursuits, treating my expertise as something valuable instead of something to overcome. Within a month, we were spending weekends at Minnesota's state parks where she'd photograph landscapes while I pointed out potential fire hazards and evacuation routes, our different perspectives creating conversations that felt collaborative instead of educational. Avery never made me question where I stood with her. When she posted photos of us on social media, the captions were things like, "Exploring Gooseberry Falls with my favorite fire safety expert," and "Date night with the man who keeps our city safe," treating my profession like something to be proud of instead of something to be embarrassed about. The contrast with Quinn was so stark it was almost comical. Here was a woman who embodied every quality Quinn claimed to want in a partner, artistic and intellectual and cultured, but she was completely attracted to my blue-collar expertise and competence. "There's something incredibly sexy about a man who prevents disasters for a living," Avery told me after I'd explained how proper exit signage had prevented a potential tragedy at a downtown office building. "You're like a real-life superhero, just quieter about it." 6 months into our relationship, Avery started including me in her social media posts regularly, introducing me to her photographer friends as her boyfriend with genuine pride, never qualifying it with explanations about our different backgrounds or career paths. When she photographed a fire station for a community safety feature, she brought me along as her expert consultant, and I watched her work with the kind of professional admiration I'd never experienced from Quinn. "You should see him analyze a building's safety systems," she told the fire chief. "It's like watching an artist work, but instead of creating beauty, he's creating safety." That night, as we reviewed her photos from the shoot, Avery turned to me with the kind of direct honesty that had become her trademark. "I need you to know something, Ian. You're exactly my type. Smart, capable, dedicated to something meaningful. I don't care if you fight fires or inspect buildings or teach fire safety classes. What I care about is that you're passionate about protecting people." For the first time in my adult life, I felt like someone saw me clearly and liked exactly what they saw, no modifications required. By spring, my career had taken off in ways I'd never imagined possible when I was fighting actual fires in Richmond. The promotion to Regional Safety Coordinator came with a corner office and responsibility for overseeing fire prevention across 6 counties, but the real validation came when my inspection work prevented a major apartment fire in downtown Minneapolis. I'd caught faulty electrical wiring during a routine inspection that could have killed dozens of residents, and suddenly I was the local news story about the fire inspector who saved lives before the emergency even happened. "Hero Inspector Prevents Tragedy Through Vigilant Safety Work," read the headline in the Star Tribune, complete with a photo of me standing outside the apartment building looking competent and professional in my inspection gear. The story went viral on local social media, and I found myself fielding interview requests from regional news outlets about the importance of proactive fire safety. Meanwhile, Quinn's romantic life was providing exactly the kind of drama she'd apparently been craving when she dismissed me as too stable and predictable. Through our mutual friend Marcus, who seemed to enjoy updating me on the chaos, I learned about her string of disappointing relationships with the artistic types she'd claimed to need. First was Damien, the musician who'd seemed perfect until he stole $60 from her purse during a house party and then tried to gaslight her about it when she confronted him. She was devastated, Marcus told me during one of our monthly check-ins. Kept saying she couldn't believe someone would betray her trust like that. I wanted to tell her that you never would have done something like that, but I figured she needed to learn that lesson herself. Next came Bradley, the aspiring writer who'd seemed intellectual and deep until Quinn discovered he'd been plagiarizing her social media posts for his blog about dating in the modern age, literally copying her thoughts about relationships and presenting them as his own insights. The final straw was Nathan, the photographer she'd met at a gallery opening who'd seemed like everything she told me she wanted: artistic, sophisticated, well-connected in the local art scene. It wasn't until 3 months into their relationship that Quinn discovered he was married with 2 kids, using his art shows as cover for affairs with women who thought they were dating an available man. "She called me crying at 2 in the morning, Marcus reported. Said she couldn't understand why she kept attracting guys who seemed perfect but turned out to be complete disasters. I told her that maybe she was looking for the wrong qualities in a partner. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a rescue axe. Quinn had rejected me for being too stable and trustworthy, then spent a year discovering that instability and artistic temperament often came with serious character flaws. But the most satisfying part wasn't Quinn's romantic failures, it was how our old friend group had started viewing her choices. "You know, Ian would never treat you like that," became the standard response whenever she complained about her latest boyfriend's behavior. Lisa, her closest friend, had apparently started saying things like, "You had a genuinely good guy who adored you, and you let him go for what? A bunch of selfish artists who don't respect you." The shift in social dynamics was fascinating to observe from a distance. I'd gone from being the reliable friend everyone took for granted to being the standard of decent behavior that Quinn's new relationships couldn't meet. When she started asking about my life in Minneapolis, the updates she received probably stung more than my silence ever could have. "Ian's killing it out there," Marcus told her, apparently enjoying his role as messenger. "Got promoted, makes good money, dating some photographer who posts about him like he's the best thing that ever happened to her. Dude's living his best life." The contrast between my thriving relationship with Avery and Quinn's series of disappointments was becoming impossible to ignore, and I could feel the shift in how people talked about our old dynamic. Instead of seeing me as the guy who'd gotten friend-zoned, our mutual friends were starting to recognize that Quinn had made a massive mistake in judgment, choosing flash and excitement over substance and genuine care. Avery and I had started talking about moving in together, A conversation that felt natural and exciting instead of desperate and one-sided like my relationship planning with Quinn had been. I love how you think about the future, Avery told me as we looked at apartment listings. You don't just dream about things, you actually plan for them and make them happen. That's incredibly attractive in a partner. Everything Quinn had seen as boring about me, my stability, my planning, my reliability, Avery treasured as exactly the qualities she wanted in a long-term relationship, and I was finally understanding the difference between someone who settles for you and someone who chooses you deliberately. The invitation to speak at the National Social Work Conference in Chicago arrived on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, but it would end up being the day Quinn finally saw exactly who I'd become in the 18 months since she dismissed me as not her type. The conference organizers wanted me to present on fire safety protocols in residential facilities, a topic that had become my specialty after preventing 3 major incidents in Minneapolis through improved inspection procedures. Avery was more excited about the speaking opportunity than I was, immediately starting to plan a long weekend in Chicago where she could photograph the city while I delivered what she called my TED Talk moment. The irony that I'd be speaking to a room full of social workers, Quinn's profession, wasn't lost on either of us, but I genuinely thought the chances of Quinn being in attendance were minimal given that it was a national conference and she'd never shown interest in continuing education beyond the bare minimum requirements. I spent weeks preparing the presentation, working with Avery to create visually compelling slides that would engage an audience more accustomed to discussing emotional trauma than thermodynamics. You're going to blow them away, she said during one of our practice sessions. They're expecting some boring safety lecture, but you're going to show them how prevention work actually saves the communities they serve. This is going to be amazing for your career. The morning of my presentation, I stood in the hotel bathroom adjusting my tie while Avery took photos of me looking more confident and professional than I'd ever felt in Richmond. My boyfriend, the keynote speaker, she captioned the Instagram story, and I could see in her eyes the genuine pride that had been missing from every interaction with Quinn. The conference center was packed. Easily 300 social workers from across the country gathered to learn about safety protocols they'd probably never considered important to their work. I was halfway through explaining how proper fire safety planning had prevented a tragedy at a group home in Minneapolis when I spotted her in the third row, Quinn's familiar profile unmistakable even in a room full of strangers. She was sitting with a notebook open, pen poised, looking every inch the professional social worker I'd never really seen her be during our time together. For a split second, our eyes met, and I watched her face cycle through surprise, recognition, and something that looked like shock at seeing me command the attention of hundreds of her professional peers. But I didn't let the moment throw me. I continued with my presentation, explaining how collaboration between social services and fire safety could save lives, demonstrating the kind of expertise Quinn had never witnessed because she'd never been interested in what I actually did for work. The standing ovation at the end lasted longer than I'd expected, with attendees approaching afterward to ask detailed questions about implementing similar programs in their communities. Quinn hung back during the initial rush, watching as her colleagues treated me like the expert I'd become, asking for my contact information and praising the practical applications of my work. "This is exactly what we need in our residential facilities," one woman told me. "You've given us a whole new framework for thinking about client safety." When Quinn finally approached, she composed herself into a professional demeanor that couldn't quite hide her underlying confusion about how the blue-collar guy she'd rejected had ended up commanding respect in her field. "Ian, that was an incredible presentation," she said, extending her hand for a formal handshake like we were meeting for the first time. "I had no idea you'd moved into this area of expertise." Her use of my full name instead of the casual familiarity we'd once shared told me everything about how she was trying to navigate this interaction. "Quinn, good to see you," I replied with the polite distance I'd use with any conference attendee. "Thank you for the feedback. Are you working in residential services now?" Before she could answer, Avery appeared at my side, sliding her arm through mine with the natural intimacy of someone who belonged there. "Baby, there are some people from the Minneapolis Fire Department who want to meet you," she said, then turned to Quinn with friendly curiosity. "Hi, I'm Avery, Ian's fiancé." The word hit Quinn like a physical blow, and I watched her face register the engagement ring on Avery's finger, the easy affection between us, the fact that I'd not only moved on but had found someone who was planning a future with me. "Fiancé," Quinn repeated, her professional composure slipping slightly. "Congratulations. I'm Quinn. We used to know each other back in Richmond." Used to know each other? The careful distance in her phrasing made it clear she wasn't going to claim any special significance in my past, and I appreciated her restraint even as I recognized the pain behind it. "Oh, you're from Richmond," Avery said warmly. "Ian's told me about his firefighting days there. Such important work, but he's really found his calling in prevention and safety education." The conversation lasted maybe 3 more minutes, professional pleasantries about my presentation and Quinn's work, but I could see her taking in every detail about Avery and me, how we stood together, how Avery spoke about my career with genuine admiration, how completely comfortable I seemed in this professional setting that was so far removed from the version of myself Quinn had known. As we walked away, Avery squeezed my arm and whispered, "She looked like she'd seen a ghost. Was that the ex who told you that you weren't intellectual enough?" I nodded, and Avery shook her head with amused disbelief. "Her loss became my incredible gain," she said, then kissed my cheek before we joined the group of fire safety professionals who were treating me like exactly the expert I'd worked so hard to become. The hot air balloon ride over Minneapolis was Avery's idea, something she'd wanted to photograph from above for months, but I'd been secretly planning to make it memorable for entirely different reasons. The ring had been sitting in my desk drawer for 3 weeks, a custom-designed piece that reflected everything I'd learned about choosing someone who actually wanted to be chosen: elegant but not flashy, meaningful but not presumptuous, expensive enough to reflect my career success but chosen because it suited Avery's style perfectly. As we floated over the city where I'd rebuilt my entire life, watching Avery take photos of the landscape below with genuine excitement, I realized this was what happiness actually felt like. Not the anxious hope I'd mistaken for love with Quinn, but the deep contentment of being with someone who celebrated my successes instead of tolerating them. "The light is incredible up here," Avery said, lowering her camera to look at me with the kind of smile that had made me fall in love with her in the first place. "Thank you for planning this. I know heights aren't your favorite thing." That was the moment I knew it was perfect. She'd remembered my mild fear of heights and appreciated that I'd chosen this experience for her anyway, the kind of thoughtful attention to my feelings that Quinn had never shown in 2 years of what I'd thought was a relationship. "Actually, I have something I've been planning for weeks," I said, reaching into my jacket pocket as the balloon drifted silently above the Twin Cities. "Avery-chan, you see me exactly as I am and love me for it, not despite it. You make me want to be the best version of myself while never making me feel like the current version isn't enough." Her camera was forgotten as she watched me drop to one knee in the basket, the city spread out below us like a promise of the future we were going to build together. "Will you marry me?" Her "yes" came with tears and laughter and the kind of kiss that would have been impossible in the cramped space if we hadn't been so focused on each other that physics seemed negotiable. The engagement photos Avery posted that evening were stunning, her ring catching the golden hour light, both of us looking genuinely joyful, the Minneapolis skyline providing a backdrop that told the story of how far I'd come since Richmond. "She said yes to forever with my favorite fire safety expert," read her caption, followed by a series of photos that captured our relationship perfectly: genuine affection, shared adventures, and the kind of mutual respect that made everything look effortless. Within hours, the congratulations were pouring in from our Minneapolis friends, my emergency management classmates, colleagues from the fire department, and eventually from people back in Richmond who'd found the post through mutual connections. Marcus was one of the first to comment, "Dude, you two are perfect together. So happy for you both," followed by dozens of responses from people who'd watched my transformation from heartbroken to thriving. But the most telling responses came from our old Richmond friend group, comments that revealed how completely the narrative about my relationship with Quinn had shifted in the 2 years since I'd left. "This is what you deserve, Ian, someone who sees how amazing you are," wrote Lisa, Quinn's former best friend. "Quinn's going to hate that she missed out on this," added another mutual friend, a comment that got more likes than I'd expected. The ring had cost more than Quinn's annual salary at the social work agency, funded by my promotion and the consulting work I'd picked up since becoming a recognized expert in fire safety education, but the real victory wasn't financial. It was the knowledge that I'd found someone who wanted to marry the man I'd become, not some theoretical version of myself that might be worthy of love someday. 3 days after our engagement announcement went viral in our social media circles, Marcus called with news that was satisfying in ways I hadn't expected. Quinn saw the engagement post. He reported with barely contained amusement. "She called Lisa crying, asking how you'd afforded such an expensive ring and when exactly you'd become successful enough to attract someone like Avery." The conversation had apparently devolved into Quinn questioning why none of their friends had told her about my career advancement, my speaking engagements, or my relationship with someone who treated me like a prize worth winning. "Lisa finally told her what we've all been thinking for 2 years, Marcus continued. "That you were the best thing that ever happened to her, and she threw it away because she thought she deserved better than a guy who actually loved her. But the ultimate vindication came a week later, when one of Avery's photographer friends showed her a screenshot from LinkedIn where Quinn had endorsed my fire safety expertise with a comment about having known Ian back when he was just starting his career in Richmond, so proud to see how far he's come. The desperation of trying to claim credit for my success, to insert herself into my professional narrative as if she'd been supportive instead of dismissive, revealed everything about how completely she'd misunderstood what she'd lost. Can you believe the audacity? Avery asked, showing me the screenshot while we planned our engagement party guest list. She rejected you for not being ambitious enough, and now she wants to take credit for your ambitions? But I wasn't angry anymore, just grateful that Quinn's inability to see my potential had forced me to find someone who not only saw it but actively encouraged it to flourish. As I looked at our engagement photos on the mantle of the apartment Avery and I now shared, surrounded by the life we were building together in a city where I discovered who I could become when someone actually believed in me, I realized that Quinn had been right about one thing. I wasn't her type romantically. I was better than her type. I was the type of man who deserved to be chosen deliberately, loved enthusiastically, and celebrated constantly, and Avery had proven that every single day since the moment she'd walked into that community safety workshop and seen exactly what Quinn had been too short-sighted to recognize.